Yeah, I know they say curiosity killed the cat, but I think curiosity is exactly what every Christian needs. Hi, I'm Justin Lee, and this is A Year of Bible. A couple of days ago in Mark chapter 6, we read about the feeding of the 5,000, where Jesus miraculously fed a giant crowd with only a few loaves and fish. Well, as we start reading today's chapter, you may feel a bit of deja vu, but I promise this is a different chapter and a different miracle. Stick with it, and you'll see what I'm talking about. Let's read. In those days, the crowd once again became very large, and they had nothing to eat. Jesus called the disciples to him and said, "I have compassion for this crowd, because they have already been with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. If I send them home hungry, they will faint along the way, for some of them have come a great distance." His disciples replied, "Where in this desolate place could anyone find enough bread to feed all these people?" "How many loaves do you have?" Jesus asked. "7," they replied. And he instructed the crowd to sit down on the ground. Then he took the 7 loaves, gave thanks, and broke them, and gave them to his disciples to set before the people. And they distributed them to the crowd. They also had a few small fish, and Jesus blessed them and ordered that these be set before them as well. The people ate and were satisfied, and the disciples picked up 7 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. And about 4,000 men were present. And when Jesus had dismissed the crowd, he immediately got into the boat with his disciples and went to the district of Dalmanutha. Then the Pharisees came and began to argue with Jesus, testing him by demanding from him a sign from heaven. Jesus sighed deeply in his spirit and said, "Why does this generation demand a sign? Truly I tell you, no sign will be given to this generation." And he left them, got back into the boat, and crossed to the other side. Now, the disciples had forgotten to take bread, except for 1 loaf they had with them in the boat. "Watch out," he cautioned them. "Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and of Herod." So they began to discuss with one another the fact that they had no bread. Aware of their conversation, Jesus asked them, "Why are you debating about having no bread? Do you still not see or understand? Do you have such hard hearts? Having eyes, do you not see? And having ears, do you not hear? And do you not remember? When I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many basketfuls of broken pieces did you collect?" 12, they answered. "And when I broke the 7 loaves for the 4,000, how many basketfuls of broken pieces did you collect?" 7, they said. Then he asked them, "Do you still not understand?" When they arrived at Bethsaida, some people brought a blind man and begged Jesus to touch him. So he took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the village. Then he spit on the man's eyes and placed his hands on him. "Can you see anything?" he asked. The man looked up and said, "I can see the people, but they look like trees walking around." Once again, Jesus placed his hands on the man's eyes, and when he opened them, his sight was restored, and he could see everything clearly. Jesus sent him home and said, "Do not go back into the village." Then Jesus and his disciples went on to the villages around Caesarea Philippi. On the way, he questioned his disciples, "Who do people say I am?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others, one of the prophets." "But what about you?" Jesus asked. "Who do you say I am?" Peter answered, "You are the Christ." And Jesus warned them not to tell anyone about him. Then he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, chief priests, and scribes, and that he must be killed and after 3 days rise again. He spoke this message quite frankly, And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But Jesus, turning and looking at his disciples, rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you do not have in mind the things of God, but the things of men." Then Jesus called the crowd to him along with his disciples, and he told them, "If anyone wants to come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake and for the gospel will save it. What does it profit a man to gain the whole world yet forfeit his soul? Or what can a man give in exchange for his soul? If anyone is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will also be ashamed of him when he comes in his Father's glory with the holy angels." So as a general rule, I consider myself a healthily curious skeptic. I like to see the evidence. And really, the modern internet really requires us to be curious and ask questions if we want to avoid being deceived. Just because somebody on social media says something is true doesn't actually mean it's true. When someone shares a post about how the people you don't like are doing something stupid or evil, or how the people you do like are doing something heroic and wonderful, it's important to stop and ask questions. What's the source of this information? Are there missing details that would give this more context? Is this the whole true story? Or is it propaganda, or parody, or an AI-generated video someone created to trick gullible people? If you're not curious, if you don't have a healthy dose of skepticism and a willingness to ask questions and dig deeper, you can be easily deceived and manipulated. So, as a skeptic who strongly believes in asking tough questions, I initially find myself, I hate to say it, but sympathizing a bit with the Pharisees when they ask Jesus for a sign. I mean, it seems reasonable, doesn't it? If you're the Son of God, let's see some proof. And initially, it feels a bit frustrating that Jesus says, "No, you don't get a sign." But let's back up and remember the context. By this point, Jesus has been performing miracles all over the place. It's not exactly a secret. I mean, there's a reason he's been mobbed by crowds everywhere he goes, and that everyone's theorizing about who he is and where his powers come from. He's just miraculously fed 2 different crowds of thousands of people each, so there are also plenty of witnesses. By the way, on that note, I've always found it interesting how Jesus emphasizes to the disciples the number of baskets of leftover pieces. 7 basketfuls in one case and 12 basketfuls in another case. Did you notice that? Any idea why? I can't tell you why. I'm not Jesus. But if I had to hazard a guess, I might point out that the numbers 7 and 12 are both symbolic of completion or perfection in the Bible. 7 days in a week, 12 tribes of Israel. You'll see these numbers come up again and again. So to have 7 or 12 baskets filled with leftover pieces could symbolize that not only was there more than enough, but there was, symbolically speaking, a perfectly unlimited amount of more than enough. When Jesus feeds a crowd, it's literally all you can eat. And again, I'm just speculating here, but I think it's interesting that when he feeds the bigger crowd, starting with even less bread, they wind up with more leftovers, as if to hammer home this idea that God's power is not limited. The bigger the need, the bigger the miracle. So anyway, Jesus has been performing huge, undeniable miracles, and some of the scribes have even admitted that he must have miraculous power. Remember back in Mark chapter 3, they couldn't deny the miracles, but since they didn't want to admit Jesus had power from God, they decided he must have power from the devil. So this isn't skepticism, it's stubbornness. Remember I said that healthy skepticism means being curious? Well, that's exactly the Pharisees' problem. They're not curious at all. If they were curious and open to new ideas, they'd be investigating these miracles to see whether there's something to them, and as the evidence piled up, they'd have to be open to changing their minds about Jesus. But they're not open to changing their minds. They've already made up their minds about Jesus, and they're determined to interpret everything in a way that backs up what they've already decided. See, if healthy skepticism is marked by curiosity, this kind of stubbornness is marked by moving the goalposts. You know that expression, moving the goalposts? It's when you're trying to show someone evidence of something to change their mind or at least get them to consider another point of view, but nothing you say is ever good enough. Because if they ask for evidence and then you show them evidence, they always just say, well, that's not good enough evidence. I need more evidence. I need a different kind of evidence. It's as if every time you get in to score a goal, the goal moves further away. Well, yeah, that didn't really count as a goal because you didn't get it all the way to here. Well, that didn't count either because you didn't get it all the way to here, and so on. They can make you feel like it's your fault for not providing enough evidence to make your case, but the truth is, they were never really open to your point of view to begin with. They're not asking for evidence out of curiosity to understand the issue better and see if maybe you might be right. They're asking for evidence out of stubbornness. They've already decided not to accept your point of view, so endlessly asking for more evidence is a way to make themselves look good, while blaming you for their own unwillingness to even consider that they might have been wrong. And that's what I think the Pharisees are doing here. If they were really curious about the truth, and they wanted a sign to be sure, well, they've had plenty. But if, as I suspect, they're just being stubborn, no sign would ever be enough. If Jesus had given in to the Pharisees' demand for a sign and performed a miracle then and there, they'd say it wasn't a good enough miracle. If Jesus performed something more spectacular, it still wouldn't be good enough. If God spoke to them in a booming voice from the sky, they'd just say, well, how do we know that wasn't a demon? It will never be enough because they've already decided that it never can be enough. They're not open to changing their minds. I suspect this is why Jesus refuses to engage with this request at all, because he knows their hearts, and he's not going to play that game. But it's not just the Pharisees in this chapter who are blinded by their lack of curiosity. Even the disciples seem to be lacking that drive to dig deeper and learn more. In the disciples' case, though, it's not due to stubbornness. They just don't seem to be used to putting the pieces together on their own. I mean, they've seen Jesus feed the 5,000, and they've seen Jesus feed the 4,000. They should know that lack of bread is not going to be a problem for Jesus. And they should know, too, that he often speaks in parables. So when Jesus talks about the leaven or yeast of the Pharisees, they should be able to put together that he's not worried about literal bread. He's talking about the Pharisees' hypocrisy and false teachings. And we'll see this same metaphor pop up several more times in later passages. But the disciples miss all that, and they get worried about not having enough bread. And Jesus responds with, "Don't you have eyes? Don't you have ears? Don't you remember?" Which I interpret as, you've got all the pieces. You've seen the miracles. You've heard my teachings. All you have to do is remember it and put it together in your head. And remember how I said last week that I think God wants us to wrestle with things we don't understand? This is another example of that, where it seems like if only they had more curiosity and more willingness to wrestle with all that they've seen and heard and experienced, they ought to be able to put some of these pieces together themselves, rather than relying on Jesus to lay it out for them time and time again. And maybe that's why he gets so frustrated with them, because he knows he won't be with them forever to keep leading them by the hand, and he wants them to start wrestling with this. Like a math tutor saying, I've given you the tools to do this problem, now you have to make the effort. I can't keep doing it all for you. Of course, we've got the benefit of 2,000 years of hindsight, so let's not be too tough on the disciples. On the TV show Ted Lasso, Ted quotes the advice, "Be curious, not judgmental." He attributes it to Walt Whitman, which is wrong, but the advice itself is good. As Christians, we should always be curious. If you find yourself disagreeing with someone, be curious. Try to understand where they're coming from. If you have a Bible disagreement with another Christian, be curious. Ask questions so you can learn why they believe what they do. Don't be like the Pharisees, so proud and sure that you're right about everything that you just look for ways to disprove everything they say. And, on the other hand, watch out for those who aren't curious and just keep moving the goalposts on you to keep you in endless debate about this or that issue. It's not worth it. But in your dealings with God, too, be curious. Study the scriptures. Ask questions. Wrestle with things you don't understand. And continually remind yourself of what God has done for you and brought you through already, what you've seen and heard and experienced. Because it's so easy, like the disciples, to forget all that when you run into a new challenge and realize you didn't bring enough bread. But it's going to be okay, because you serve a God of unlimited power, who spoke the very universe into existence. And no matter what, God always has more than enough left over for anyone who wants to come to the table.